So hopefully you all see my my screen. Is that right? And I'm going to try. I just got to do a little bit of a rearranging of my where I can view everybody. One more thing I want to do. Yeah, this works. I like to see people's faces. You don't need to share your face if you don't want to, but it helps me feel connected. I'm a very awkward speaker, and it just helps me feel like I'm connected. If that's difficult for your bandwidth or something, that's okay. You don't need to do it. Okay, so I'm going to grab my clicker here and get started. Do you want to introduce, does anybody want to introduce this first, or do you want me to just get going?
All right, so just a short introduction. Today, our guest is Woody. We have mob programming. Stay until the end because we are going to give some presents. I think that's basically it. Philip, you have anything to add? Woody, stage is yours, and thank you one more time.
All righty. Now, sometimes I speak too fast. So if I'm speaking too fast, somebody please let me know. There's going to be a language barrier here, perhaps. And so just I'll slow down if I can. This talk is really dear to me. It helps me understand why perhaps we would even want to do something like mob programming. And that's what I'm going to be sharing here today. And so I want to make sure that I've got my clicker working properly. It'll take me a second. Yep. All righty. So this is the first thing I always share. I'm not here to tell you what you should do. I'm here to tell you some things that have worked for me and some thinking that I've done. And I don't believe mob programming is necessarily universally useful. So that does, how could I know that? But what I've found over the years, and I've done at least, I don't know, 500 workshops, maybe closer to 1,000 over the last almost 10 years. And I've seen lots of people doing this. So I think it's pretty useful. But let's see what we learn here today. I'm going to give you a really rapid introduction to mob programming, which you may never have heard of. Mob programming is also sometimes called team programming or crowd programming or ensemble programming. I still use our original term for it. This isn't really our original term, but it's the one that seemed to stick. So it's essentially all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time, in the same space, and at the same computer. Nowadays, we can think of this more as being the same virtual space and the same virtual computer, or some other mechanism for sharing what we're working on. We're usually, when we're working remotely, sharing using Zoom or something, we're sharing our screen. And there's lots of ways to do it. We can cover that some other time. This basic concept is if we gather together all the knowledge and skills we need, we can work on anything we work on directly from start to finish. Working on something from start to finish is a powerful thing. That's what this is about. In other words, we're not going to be blocked from getting work done because the knowledge we need is right there in the room. We're going to go rapidly through things. I mean, we're not necessarily going faster. We're going in a way with less interference or less blockage. It looks like this, and I'm going to point out, just for those of you who have already asked about it, I hired this person and brought them onto this team because they're a tester. And he's somebody I'd worked at other companies. But here's what we have in a cross-functional team: a tester, product owner, who also happens to be a developer in a different department. One of the developers, I was also a facilitator, another developer, a database expert, and 2 more developers. Each of the developers have different skill sets. Some of them are experts on back-end stuff, and some on front-end stuff, and some on communicating with other systems. The database expert is giving that knowledge, the tester is giving their knowledge. We have all the knowledge we need. As a matter of fact, on this project, we never would have to go off of this team to ask somebody a question. All the knowledge is there. It's like you could work on this alone if all that knowledge was in your brain. But nowadays with modern work, we rarely have something where we have all the knowledge needed to do an entire project. That comes from a number of people. To be clear, it's not 5 people watching one person coding. the person at the keyboard is following the direction. They're acting as a conduit for the team to get their idea into the computer. So essentially, we follow some protocols, and the main one we would follow is called driver navigators. This came from something I learned in pair programming. And in this particular case, you can see there's one person at the keyboard and everyone else is navigators. They're helping guide the process, talking about what we're going to do, giving the next little step to the person at the keyboard so they can take that next little step, which is usually only going to be a handful of lines of code. Now, if the person that at the keyboard doesn't know how to program, they still can be guided. We found that works okay. However, we would never force somebody to be at the keyboard. We used a rotation where the people at the keyboard would switch out every few minutes, but that's not even necessary. There's lots of ways to do this. The concept with driver navigator, however, oops, I got to point at my screen again. When I click off of it, I ending up somewhere else. The driver, we call it a driver. They're like in a car. They're at the steering wheel, and the rest of the people, in a way, are like the passengers who know where they want to go. And like in a taxi, they can tell the driver if they say we need to go to the airport. Well, the driver probably knows how to get us to the airport. But if we're going to Bill's house and we give them the address, they may not know the exact route, and we can guide them. You got to turn left in about a mile, and so on. So the navigators are thinking about and sharing the idea that we're trying to accomplish. I used this guideline in my pair programming. I learned about this from Zuill and Falco. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. And this is a really powerful way of working. It enhances the communication that goes on. We won't go into details of this here, but in my workshops, this is what we practice or what we're trying to learn about, is how do we allow somebody who's doing the thinking to communicate with someone who's going to do the typing. That's the basic idea. And with mob programming, it works pretty well. We need to learn how to do it. It's not something we automatically can do. It seems crazy. Preposterous means contrary to reason or common sense, or utterly absurd or ridiculous. Well, my father, who was an engineer, used to say, I don't care about common sense. I care about uncommon wisdom. And I think that's a much better way to think about things. And, Einstein is credited with saying, if at first an idea doesn't seem absurd, it's not a good idea. Whether that's true that he said that or not, it seems like he's the sort of guy who would have said that. But I'm going to share some pictures real quick. The original place where we did this, which was here, we went on and grew it to 8 or 9 teams. We no longer are working in a co-located way. We are spread out, working remotely. However, I don't work there anymore. I left there in 2015, but I still do workshops for them frequently. I'm going to show you a bunch of people working co-located and a few pictures of people working remotely. All of these teams are doing mob programming. Most of these pictures are from 5 or more years ago because I don't see much need to change them in my talk. But these are teams usually like this group here. They have 6 or 7 teams working this way. Same thing over here. I don't know about there or there. Again, there's about 8 teams at least working that way here. This is TUI in Stockholm, a group in London, which had 6 teams when I visited them. Zito, California has 10 teams working this way. A group in South Africa. Now, I don't think this is mob programming over here. That's Grace Hopper. 1960, I was not doing computer consulting in 1960 because I was only 6 or 7 years old. But I think they got the idea. You all work together on the same thing at the same time. Notice this one I just put in because it's kind of fun. I'm not sure I could do this all day long, but it's rather dedicated, sitting on the floor. This is one company in Stockholm. This is Sverige Television, SVT. This team is a very powerful cross-functional team, including the user experience expert, the UI, the UX expert. This team has all the skills, everything they need to do their work. I'm not sure what their exact work is. I think it has to do with watching television shows on your phone device or something like that. There are teams doing it remotely. So here's an example of one, Corgi Bites in Eastern United States. These folks are all in different cities. and they work together 3 hours a week, 3 days a week, or 3 times a week, 3 hours each time during the week. It's a lot like this. This is a group actually that's partly remote and partly on site together. Everybody here they're not programming clearly. This is NASA mission control, but they're all here to do a single mission together. They need all the knowledge that's in this room. Matter of fact, you can see down here in the corner, payload deployment and retrieval. That's one skill, one knowledge area that's needed. Each one of these stations is another skill area. There's even people, this looks like a shuttle operation. They don't do those anymore. That a shuttle operation, that means there's some people working remotely because they're out in outer space somewhere. I hope you get the picture here. All this knowledge is needed. So they bring together all the skills and knowledge needed to work on a single thing until it's completed. So let's go on. We don't need to belabor this too much. I usually do this as a workshop and I'll ask you to give this to me, but why would we work this way? I'm just going to tell you. Why would we work this way with 4, 5, 6 people at a single computer? And this is what we usually hear. And these are some of the things we found. Lots of knowledge sharing happens. Continuous code and design review, very powerful, ongoing all the time. We have many eyes, many perspectives, many brains on the work. Even 2 people with the same skill are bringing to it 2 different perspectives on how to solve a problem. No 2 people approach each problem the same way. We have a way of getting really rapid feedback from our teammates. And if we have everybody who needs to be involved actually on the team, that's very powerful. We'll talk a lot about that today. However, we also get feedback from our users, who I like to think of as being on the team as well, by getting our things into use really quickly. Because we can work on something start to finish and deploy it, we were usually doing 3 or 4 deployments a day, and usually on 2 or 3 different projects. We would deploy something and then switch. We kind of like time slicing the way that we would work. We get to focus on the right things. I've noticed when we have work assigned to us, we're never deciding, is this really worth working on? But when we work as a team with all the decision makers together, we get this powerful ability to make better decisions, and we start focusing on the more important things, the right things. This enhances the flow, eliminates queues, and reduces inventory. That's what today's talk is about, so we'll cover that more later. We end up with better solutions of higher quality, and it was more fun, less stressful, more engaging. And I'll give you a little bit of a warning. If you find this to be stressful or fatiguing, it's probably worthwhile figuring out how to make it where it isn't. A lot of teams complain about, boy, this is hard to do. It takes a lot of energy. And I think a big part of that is we haven't yet learned how to work well together. And a big part of learning to work well together is to accept the input from each person, and try each person's ideas. When we get good at that, everybody starts contributing more and contributing at a much higher level. But there's another way to answer this question. Why would we work this way? And this is the answer. Because the team decided to work this way. If we have a choice on how we work, we can find the best ways for us to work, or at least a better way than the way we're currently working. But if we're not given that freedom, this can really be problematic. We will then just do whatever we're asked to do in the way we're told how to work. And that, I think, hampers our ability to be self-directing. I think it's important to understand this. That's more for managers than for anyone else. So whenever I share this, now we're on to the meat of this talk. Whenever I share this concept, there's always one question. There's actually 2, but one that I always hear that I want to address today. And that question is this: how can you be productive with 5 people at one computer? Now, that seems like a reasonable question, but when I first heard it, I said, I don't know. Why does that matter? Because I don't care how we can be productive. All I care is that we are productive. Now, I don't think we need to be more productive, but actually, I didn't like the word productive, but we'll cover that in a minute. We were paying attention, and this is what we noticed. When we work separately, and we added up the work, this represents 5 people working separately on slightly different things, maybe, that are all going to get integrated. When we're done with the work and we bring it together, we would get a certain amount of work done within a certain time period. When we worked as a team, we started noticing almost instantly we were getting a lot more done. It didn't feel like we were doing more, but at the end of the day, And this actually represents 2 days worth of work. This is 2 days worth of work when we gathered it together working separately. That came from records that were from the year before we started working this way. And this is the year after we started working this way. We were getting a lot more done. Now, why take my word for it? This is not proof of any kind. This is just what we experienced. There were a lot of other factors as well. We were learning to do software development using what I would consider better practices than what were being used in this company. So at first, I thought, well, this is just comparing how much did we get done? A little bit versus a lot. That's enough reason maybe, but this is what we were really finding. It wasn't just more stuff. It was the more meaningful stuff. It was more meaningful to our users and to the organization. And it was better done. And that means it was constructed both in a manner that made it easier to work on, easier to enhance, easier to deploy, but it also made it easier for the users to use it. We were making a better quality product. And we could say this is much higher quality. In the 3.5 years I worked at this organization, Hunter Industries, where we originated the idea. In the 3.5 years I worked there after we started mob programming, we only had 3 bugs introduced into our production environment on dozens and dozens of projects we had done. In the first 1.5 years, we had only gotten 1 bug. So that was really interesting to us, that our quality shot through the roof. Now, originally in that organization, they had projects that just were full of bugs. And I would say this, that code still had bugs after we started mob programming, because that code was written before this level of scrutiny and this improved quality that we could get. So we got a good comparison between the two. We got to see for ourselves how much better this was. And as we thought about it, we knew it had something to do with this saying from Russell Ackoff. He was a well-known systems thinker, has written some marvelous books. I've got 2 or 3 of them on my shelf here. It's not about the parts, which is how most managers manage things. We want to utilize the parts, the individuals. It's about how well the individuals interact and work together. Now, we knew that's true, but why? Why does this work? What is important about this? So I want to start here. I didn't like the word productive. And my father, who was an engineer, taught me a lot about how do we convince people or make the points we need to make to get the work done the way it needs to get done. And he used to say this, a good question leads to a better question. We don't need to answer our questions until we get to the right question. Now, this is a tricky thing. I'm going to share a little bit about how I would do it, but I wanted a better question. And one of the bits of advice my father would give me is, you first need to change their question into one you're willing to answer. And I don't like this question because I don't care about productivity. Now, you might use the word productivity differently in your part of the world, but this is, I'm going to explain to you what I'm after here. A lot of people use words like efficiency, productivity, effectiveness, and essentially at its essence, efficiency is about utilization, which I don't think is a very useful thing to focus on. Productivity is about completing something. We've made a product. We've produced something. Until we produce it, it's just work. Once it's produced, now we have the thing we're trying to make. But if effectiveness is about producing efficiently the right thing. So efficiency and productivity might be useful, but I think effectiveness is really where we want to be, because efficiency can be measured just in the busy work. Is everybody busy? Are these machines running at full capability? That doesn't really measure anything for us. We could end up with boxes and boxes of parts that never get put together, or in software development, tons of lines of code that never really work well together, never get deployed. Productivity means we are finishing things, but we can measure that we're finishing things by measuring all the things we're getting done, which means a lot of it could be the wrong things. We want to measure, we want to get the right things done. And that takes usually an oblique path. It's not usually the direct path we thought it would be. So most corporations, most organizations never become effective. Is there a question? No, okay. All right, we'll continue on. How can we be productive with 5 people, 1 computer? I just want to change that. How can we be effective? Now, that's a question I'm willing to answer. but it's not the better question that I'm after. So my father would say, okay, the next step, once you've got the question in a form that you would be willing to answer, you have to realize those first questions are usually not the right ones. We need to keep going. And to get there, we need to understand the point of view of the person asking the question. So what I would do is whenever I gave a talk like this, I would ask the person afterwards, usually privately, I would ask something to the effect of, tell me about what you're thinking when you ask how can you be effective with 5 people at one computer. And they will usually tell me this, well, when we separate the work up and have them working on it, we're going to get more done. We're going to have more things getting worked on, and we're going to result in a bigger end result. And they'll say it in ways like this: I want to get 5 things done, not just one thing. But when we work as a team, so this is part of why I think we need to analyze this. When we work as a team, we're going to get things done. We're just going to get them done in sequence, so to speak. Whereas when we're getting things done in this way, they're thinking we're going to parallelize the work. We're going to separate everybody and parallelize the work. We're going to do it in parallel. And that way we're taking better advantage of our people. But we've destroyed our ability to go from start to finish. So they believe that this is good. And I don't think it is. So they're really saying, they're not saying so much, I want to get 5 things done. They're saying, I want to have 5 things being worked on. That's not such a good thing. So there's another way they say it. I don't want to pay 5 people to do the work of 1 person. So I think this is a contrary way of thinking about how we manage people and how we get work done. We're losing the benefits of having people collaborating. So the next step, my father says, you got to flip it over. So you get the point of view of the person asking the question, and now you want to pose the question from your point of view or the opposite point of view. And in my case, it would be something like this: how can we be effective if we separate the people that should be working together? Now, neither of these are good questions to answer. This is the path where we get to a better question. But usually when we separate people, it looks like this: they're going to work in different cubicles, or they're only going to communicate a little bit during the day. One thing we'll see is they're working in different departments. That makes it harder for them to communicate. If we convince somebody in another department we should do this, and then they sign off on it, it's hampering our ability to quickly change or respond to change, as they say we should do in Agile. So this is what we usually see. Not only are they sometimes in a different department, they're even sometimes, they're working under a different boss. They're sometimes in a different organization. And none of this is conducive to good collaboration. We need to really get good at collaboration to make those kinds of scenarios work. Here's the thing. This led to 2 better questions. The first one is, if we have these 2 different ways of working, how can we tell one is better than the other? And you can't do an experiment where you take a whole bunch of teams and they're going to work solo, and a whole bunch of teams and they're going to work as mob programming on the same work for the same type of project, and then compare the differences to see. Nobody's got the money to do those kinds of experiments. You can do it in very minor ways. But how else could we tell? And the one we came, so that's a question that leads to finally the question we landed on. What are the problems? What are the things that destroy effectiveness? If we do a little exercise with that, and then we compare the difference between 2 different ways of working, do we see those problems here? Do we see those problems there? I usually will ask this question like this: what are the things you are experiencing right now that make it difficult for you to be effective? And when I go into an organization that isn't yet doing mob programming, ask them to do that, I end up with a specific set of somewhere within a set of about 200 reasons or things that destroy effectiveness. I'm going to ask you right now, we're going to just take a minute. You're thinking about, well, what are the things that destroy effectiveness for me in my daily work right now? If you can just throw those into the chat as fast as you can, just please share at least one thing. What gets in the way of you being effective in your work? We'll stop me talking for a minute. And if you can they get to the chat? Everybody has access to chat? Just start throwing it in there. Well, give us a minute. What makes it difficult for you to get to be effective in your work right now? Oh, there we go. Nope, I thought I saw something come in. Yep, there's 14 new messages. Excellent. Really good. Okay, here we go. Decisions that someone outside the team needs to make. Waiting for a code review. Integration, long build times. I worked at a place once, this was 20 years ago, where it took about 2.5 days to build the project. Whoa. I'm glad things are a bit better than that now. Lack of information that is needed. This is really, thank you so much. Knowing the whole business domain, queues, rework, lack of information, hidden gotchas in the code I don't know about, dependency with other team member, defects, interruptions, lack of domain knowledge, slow feedback, interruptions. Interruptions is a big one. Dependencies and interruptions look like the biggest ones. Here's what I'm going to share with you. I did this exercise at a company about 5 or 6 years ago. Oh, never-ending meetings about things that are non-crucial. Meetings about things that are crucial are a waste as well. But yeah, I agree with you. Common understanding. Well, we thought that we see the picture in the same way when we didn't. Yeah. So look at this list. I'm going to show you. This is a group, I think it was 2014 or 15 that I did this at a company. This was before they were starting the mob program. They came up with all of these things. Look at that list. That was 50 things in 3 minutes. A group of 20 people focusing on this came up with. But you were saying interruptions. Look at this: context switching, workflow interruptions, distractions, multitasking. Those are all related. How about unclear requirements? You said that. Unrealistic expectations, time zone differences, lack of a plan, needless meetings. I would say any meeting. A meeting is a symptom of a problem. And that problem is we haven't learned how to communicate well as we do our work. We communicate in meetings rather than communicating as we are doing the work. That's introducing cues. I love these two. Let's see if I can get the, yep. Too much noise, too quiet. Two different points of view there for sure, right? All righty. So when we can get this list, we can now ask ourselves, do these two different ways of working have this? And this is what we notice for ourselves. This is why we even asked this question in the first place. We notice most of these problems, or I would say symptoms of problems, faded away when we start working as a group. We no longer were getting the context switching. We weren't getting that workflow interruptions or the distractions or the multitasking. We weren't getting the misunderstandings about the requirements because the product owner working on the team. Now that didn't come till later. A lot of the things that would plague us before we started mob programming disappeared for us. They faded away. Matter of fact, almost all of those things disappeared. We didn't set out to solve any of those issues. They just stopped being a problem for us. What we set out to do was to learn how to work well together, to learn how to be more effective in our work through things like test-driven development and rapid deployment techniques, and getting stories broken down into such a manner that we could deploy them frequently and get them into real use. We were learning a lot of stuff besides just mob programming. But once we started mob programming, the big one really was, yeah, you probably didn't notice that animation. Look at this. We noticed many of the problems simply faded away when we started working as a team. So that took me like an hour to figure out how to do that fade. So I have to point it out just to make it look like I know what I'm, you know, that I put in the effort for this talk. Now I know how to do that. I can do it in 1 minute. Okay. So one of the biggest problems is communication. The area of problems is communication problems. The one that I'm going to share with you today, I call the question queue time. And I right now believe, and have for quite a while, this might be the fundamental error or the fundamental problem that mob programming helps alleviate. And this is how I phrase it. I did a little research at a company back in 2003 or 4. They were having communication problems at a place I was working. Things were getting miscommunicated or it was taking a long time. And so we started investigating, why is this happening? And the big one that came forward for us was, this is what I call the question queue time. I made up that word. The amount of time that we must wait to get an answer to the question that is blocking us. And that's about the dependencies on other people. That's dependencies, that our documents never fulfill all the communication we thought that they did. They actually foster or increase miscommunication. So let's see what we got here. This can be measured with a value stream map, but the waiting is waste. And as a matter of fact, I would say that may be the biggest waste in product development. And we'll see why I think that later. But the question queue time can be measured with the value stream map. So I got to click back up here. There we go. So value stream map can be done in different ways. I originally learned this from a book by Mary Poppendick that she wrote in 2003 called Lean Software Development. So that's quite a ways ago, 20 years almost. But if you measure the top bar here, it's representing work that we're getting done. And the red bar or the bar across the bottom is indicating that we're waiting. So this is how we can measure waiting time. If we're working on something and then we get blocked on a question, we go down, now we're waiting, we got the answer, now we're working again. It also implies there's some queuing going on or some context switching and ramping back up to do the work and things like that. So if we use a value stream map to measure this, we can easily measure how much waste we have in our system regarding queuing. And if we make an example that for every hour we work, we get one question, that's just a hypothetical question, way to look at it. Let's just assume that's what's happening. We can use this to measure what would happen if we, let's say, we're getting no queue time. Then we just work productively, effectively all day long. But what if it's a 2-minute queue time? Well, that's not too bad. It doesn't interfere too much. But what if it's 10 minutes? That's interfering actually quite a bit. When it turns into an hour or two, that's interfering massively. We're losing at least half of our productivity or our effectiveness during the day. And boy, the big one, what if it takes a day or two? Now, when I do this as a poll at most companies, people will say it usually takes in the range of 1 or 2 hours to 1 or 2 days to get an answer to a question, such as, we don't understand this requirement, this little bit of it here. We got to get a better understanding, so we need to talk to the product owner. Product owner isn't available. We try to arrange a meeting. He's available next Tuesday. We just lost 2 days or 3 days. This is how we can measure it. So how do we typically solve for this? You can put this into the, perhaps you can put this into the chat. How do we normally solve for this? Or how do we normally deal with this, that we're blocked? What do we do? Task switching. Thank you, Marco. We take on other work. In other words, we introduce inventory so that we can stay busy. This is like, you can already tell, I'm going to say this is harmful. This is super harmful. Inventory itself is a waste. Inventory is work that's been started on, but not yet delivering value. In a lean sense of the word, everything that you've worked on that the customer isn't yet using is waste. Now we can say, yeah, but soon we'll deliver it. Well, yeah, at that moment, it will no longer be waste. But because it's waste now, its chance of harming our efforts is very high. Once we deliver it, we'll learn why we did the wrong thing or in what way it was wrong. We want to get there a lot quicker. So introducing inventory itself as waste is not a good thing. So what do we normally do? We introduce more work. We introduce that inventory. But the problem here is it looks like we've solved a problem, but it solved the wrong problem. We don't want to solve the problem that we're not busy enough. We want to solve the problem that we're not effective in our work. And that problem here really is we've dealt with the symptom. It doesn't look like everybody's busy, but we didn't deal with the problem. And what is the problem? We're not able to get our answers in a timely manner. Now it looks like this is okay, but it isn't. It's hiding a huge amount of waste. So managers often do this. I apologize for managers in the world. I'm a manager or have been myself many times. I also like to more think of myself as a software developer, but here's the point. This seems like it's good to a manager. We're keeping everybody working on something useful. but wastes need to be dealt with. They don't need to be covered up or hidden. So let's move forward on this. How did we solve for this? That's a trick question. We didn't solve for this. It faded away. It went away. Whoever was on the team, if they were working together all day long, this disappeared for us. This is very interesting to me. We didn't set out to solve this queuing problem. The queuing problem disappeared when it was a question we had for someone that was on the team. But there were other people not on the team, product owners, testers, the deployment and infrastructure people, and the database people in that organization were not on our team. It started showing us that actually the bigger waste of queuing wasn't the questions we had for our team members. It was the questions we had for the people that weren't on the team. So we actually started gathering, it took us a while, these different skills and knowledge onto the team. We would ask a product owner, if you're working with us on something, we expect a lot of involvement, a lot of your time, and we want you to be a first-class member of this team. If you're not ready to contribute enough for us to be successful, maybe we need a different product owner, someone else who is ready to spend that time to get this work done. So I've got lots of examples, but in the nature of time here, I want to skip ahead a little bit, but you get the picture. When we were doing this little bit of research as to why is this effective for us, we realized this. We were achieving flow, a type of automatic one-piece flow. So that's going to be the rest of this talk mostly. Me talking about what is flow and why do we use it? Why is it important to us? So when we started studying flow, we found this. There are other kinds of flow. And the big other flow is like being in the zone. That's very different than the flow of lean product development. So these are psychological flow and lean flow. And actually this fellow, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think he's from Hungary, I'm not sure, but boy, that name's hard for me to say. He unfortunately passed away, I think last October. Brilliant thinker who wrote a lot of books on the subject of flow. And he describes flow this way. Flow is this highly effective state that you can get into when you're really fully immersed and focused on a thing. Well, that's what a lot of programmers do, and they call it being in the zone. When we get in the zone, we work really effectively. Without the interruptions, we can stay in the zone, and we know what we're working on. We become more familiar. The ideas flow through our brain. This is really great. And we start realizing, well, if we're trying to get this lean style flow, are we damaging or harming the psychological flow of individuals? Matter of fact, that was the first question. I don't like this question. We came up with a better question. But to answer this question, we did a lot of talking on the team, and we realized we don't think we're destroying this flow because each individual is able to manage their own time. And we had a sort of a protocol where if you felt like you wanted to go work alone or think about something alone, you could go do it. You go walk around the building, you could go to another room, you could go relax somewhere, you can go have a meal, whatever you want to do. Where you do your best thinking, you get to go do that. Interesting to me. So we felt we weren't destroying it because each person comes to their understanding of something in their own way. And we applied that as we went. So each individual was still in charge of their own thinking, and they could get in their own style of flow. But we were noticing something about flow, of this type of psychological flow. And I wanted a better question. This was the better question we came up with. Is there this other kind of flow? Maybe there's some kind of a team psychological flow. And what would that be like? And at first we couldn't find any research. We actually found some after a while that had been done almost at the same time we were trying to learn this stuff. And I think this research was done in 2010. It eventually got turned into a book, but we found the documents of the research and we learned about this thing called team flow. But at first we did our own research, and we did it by reading books, finding pictures of teams that looked like they were all working on the same thing at the same time. And we were finding stories about that people were putting in blog posts or had written about in magazine articles about how effective their collaborations were. So I'm going to share 4 of the pictures we had captured over time. This is like a group of kids, I guess, learning to play guitar in their garage, right? This is like an example of flow. Now, whether they always got flow, that's hard to say, but when they were performing, you could definitely see the flow occurring for them. A whole different kind of flow. This is a group in at Xerox PARC, where they invented a lot of stuff that is in our modern computers and handheld devices and stuff. A lot of what they thought about and devised has been universally used. This is a whole different kind of flow. They would gather together and think together and someone would share ideas. They would try to destroy the ideas or build on the ideas. They had a kind of a flow. My favorite example is this, how a team in a surgery works with flow. They're all focused on the same thing at the same time, but they all bring their different skills to it. That goes with this music, by the way, as well. We have a guitar player or two, a drummer, a singer, all the different skills we need to make the music we want to make. It's all there. This is part of the integration, the high skill integration. Some of them know how to sing certain ways and certain things and to make the whole crowd go crazy. So that's the skills involved. Look at this one though. I've had this explained to me. I don't know if I got it completely right. There are 3 surgeons and a supervising surgeon. There, I think, are 5 or 6 technicians, each waiting for their specialty to come into play or to apply it during the entire operation. There's a kind of flow going on here. So as we studied these things, it started becoming clear to us, yeah, there's this other flow we're getting. And we started calling it team flow. And then we found that research and they turned it into a book. If we have a collective ambition and a common goal, and perhaps it's aligned with our personal goals, we have a situation where team flow could really pay off. We have to have all those different skills and we integrate them into the work we're doing. So we have a tester who is looking at things from the point of view of a tester. Not how do we get this thing to work, but how are we going to prove that it works? And how are we going to prove that something might be broken? We want that there while we're writing it, not afterwards. I want to go on with this. There's a lot more to cover here. We need to have the skills of open communication, and it gives us a safety of working together. If I share an idea and someone else says, that's not going to work, well, that's not a very open communication. If I share an idea and somebody says, let's give it a try, now we start getting good at sharing our ideas. So we need to be good at letting others' ideas be tried. I've seen this so many times now, especially with a lead developer and a junior person says, what if we try this? And the lead developer wants to say, no, that's not going to work and here's why. But we try the idea anyways, and it ends up working or leads us to something better that works. And I've had these lead developers come to me and say, I didn't think that was going to work, but I learned something. When we're willing to try other people's ideas, that learning amplifies, it accelerates. There's a lot more to it. If we allow each person to be safe in sharing their thoughts, then they will share them more and more freely. And we need to enhance that or encourage that on the team. Eventually, we start getting a mutual commitment, but I think that can be done in several ways. We could just say, we're committed to treating each other with respect and kindness and enhance each other's ability to think. We need to learn how to think well together. It builds a sense of unity for us, and we get this sense of joint progress. Some people say you should mix the teams up frequently. I like to see just a more natural way where the teams slowly change over time. But we build this mutual trust. As long as we have the holistic focus where all of our skills can be focused on this one important thing, we're going to have a potential for a highly collaborative, capable team. Well, this team flow we think we were achieving. That was probably the big kind of non-lean flow that we felt we were achieving. But I want to take this to the next level. That is, what about that lean flow that I was talking about? The lean flow was where we started this discussion and what made us think about flow. And so this lean flow is like in lean manufacturing, where in lean manufacturing, you're going to take each piece from start to finish without the inventory, without the queuing or waiting. Now, we sometimes try to do that in manufacturing by having lots of parts sitting around that are going to be put together, but that isn't flow because now we have the inventory. It's inventory of unused parts. So it's really about having just-in-time delivery of the parts we need, just-in-time manufacturing of the parts we need. It's a big, big thing. So this is a very, very simple example or definition of it in manufacturing. But now the question is, can we get this in software development? And I wouldn't give this talk if I didn't think we could, because that's what we were seeing. We were getting this flow of working directly on each one thing, completely limited work. If we call this work in progress, then it's completely limited WIP, WIP. We're working directly on each thing from start to finish. Here's the idea the product owner wants. We break it down to something that we can accomplish right now. We work, it means that it can be worked on. We work on it till it's done, pairing off or removing things that we don't yet need, delivering it, and then going to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. This was highly effective for us. Well, there's a great book that's on this topic. I always have a copy of it. Oh, I see it right now on my desk. I probably got 3 or 4 copies of this because I lend it out to friends and people I work with. Great book. Principles of Software Development, of Product Development Flow. And software development is a type of product we are producing. We are a product we are developing, not producing. So that's the idea. And I'm going to cover one little bit of this book, but you should read the whole book. It's really wonderful. It's quite a bit. It's really full of information. The principle of queuing waste from the book, Reinertsen says, queues are the root cause of the majority of economic waste in product development. Queues create waste. They are a source of waste. The longer cycle time, I think, is the big thing, which leads to increased risk, more variability, more overhead, lower quality, less motivation. That's one I would like to talk about further, but you get the picture. What if this is true? That's all I want to ask. What if it's true that queuing is such a huge waste? We better deal with it. Well, I think I could define a flow in software development this way. Each story flows from idea, from the product expert or the team, to the delivered working software as directly as possible. Without the queuing, without the inventory, without the distractions, without the interruptions, without the context switching. This is the thing. If we can get all of this, eliminate all of this waste simply by collaborating closely, this isn't about going as fast as possible from point A to point B. It's about taking the best route, the most useful route to get from point A to point B. And of course, to me, that's what Agile gives us. If we can deliver a small, inexpensive attempt at value one at a time really frequently, then we can get a lot of value out of our work. And I started working in an Agile manner before Agile was even the term for it, doing extreme programming. It works really well. That most organizations that try to do Agile don't understand this, try to apply this, does pretty much confuse me because it just seems obvious to me. Clearly, it's not obvious. So we found that once we had achieved flow, we were working on the right things. We were working less on the wrong things. The right things include the discovery, the exploration, the experimenting, the discovery. This is the stuff that really matters in software development. Not getting work done, but discovering what's the right thing to be working on. And that we can do in tiny steps. And we were working on way less of the wrong things. I won't belabor this. I've already covered all of this. So when working as a team, we were achieving this lean flow and we were eliminating the queues and the excess inventory. So what should we optimize for? What we optimized for was the flow. We were going to optimize for the flow of the work, not the output of the individual. That is, I think, a mistake that most organizations make, that we do the reverse. We focus on the output of the individual, which I just don't think that's useful. We're not trying to get the most out of each person. We're trying to get the best from each person. What is their best contribution? That means we don't need to contribute all the time. We just contribute when it's appropriate to contribute. Now we're almost to the end of this. I believe that I can now answer that original question. How can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? Now, originally, remember, I thought it was that we were dealing with flow versus flow. We were losing some of the value of flow to get a different kind of flow. But in this research or in this journey, we discovered we were getting both of these kinds of flow. So I call it flow plus flow. But it wasn't just psychological flow and lean flow. There was also the team flow. So now it's psychological flow plus the team psychological flow plus the lean flow. And some bright programmer in one of my sessions once shouted out, "That is Flow plus plus." And I thought that was pretty cute. So I kept that in the talk. So to kind of close this out, I'd just say this. It's more about creating an environment where great things can happen than the mob programming itself. If we get good at creating an environment where everyone can excel and be the best they can be, then we will end up with some kind of good result. So that's the talk. I don't think I don't even know what language you speak there. I can say it in Swedish, tack så mycket, Dankeschön in German, or maybe thanks so much if you're in the US. How would I say that in Serbia?
Hvala.
What is that?
Hvala.
Hvala.
Vala. All right. I like that. I'll look that up. Maybe I'll add a slide for that. Thank you so much. Thanks for letting me have the time to share this with you. So I'm willing to do whatever you'd like to do now. If anybody's got an observation or a question, I'm willing to take it. How many people? We have 29 people here, so this is a small enough group. Oh, thank you. Yeah, if you've got to go and take care of your daughter, do that. Family is more important than this any day of the week. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So you're welcome to stay, and I'll answer questions. It looks like Marco, you have a question?
Yeah, okay. I'm one of those evil managers. So
Yeah, well, join the team.
Yeah.
We're all evil managers.
Okay. I actually have two questions that are
Sure.
like on the top of my list. So the first thing is the context of remote work,
Sure.
and how does it in practice works, and the other thing about how to scale this concept. So how does that work?
So how do you scale individuals?
How do
Right
you
now,
scale
how are
up? Yeah. Sorry?
how do you scale up? How are you scaling up now with the individuals you have without mob programming? Whatever you do for that probably would be the same here, right? I don't know how to, how are you already scaling the way you do things? Use that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Not sure. Since if I understood this concept, this example, to be more precise, is about 5 people at on one computer. So
It could be
would you
5. It
put
could be
6, 10?
anywhere between maybe 2 or 3 to 5 or 6 or 8. The most we ever had at one time was 14, because we were working on a very complex thing that was critically important to the company, and we needed knowledge from all over the company to solve these issues. So yeah, but yeah, 5 or 6 people. So please continue, because I want to better understand what you're asking about scaling.
Yes. So if I have a project that's like we're working on different parts of a large project, and it has like let's say 300 people working on it, how do I organize this? Like every team has one computer, and then I have to align them about what's done.
When we're working remotely, of course, we all have our own computers, right? However, there are several ways to do it remotely, so we'll go into that afterwards. When we worked this way, every team member has their own computer. Usually in those days, we would use a laptop. And then we had the one main computer through which all of our work goes into our code base. So we pretty much made an early guideline for ourselves that if you're working on something separately, you bring it back to the team, so we can at least work on it together a little bit before we get it into the computer. But already, if you're fragmenting your work off into little bits, so each individual can, that's a bigger scaling problem than having teams which are working with slightly bigger bits. So I would say whatever you do to scale up for individuals is sort of the same. We just have less problems when we're scaling up based on teams. Most teams can self-manage, they can self-direct if we allow them to get good at that. So the job of the manager becomes easier and easier. If we do the opposite and say, okay, the manager has to figure out who works on what and how are we going to divide this work up, the work of the manager actually becomes harder and harder. Now, I want to be really clear here. I have managed teams in software development and in many other things. So my very first job working for other people in software development, I was a programmer, but I had only programmed for myself in a company that I had and done a few side jobs for other people. But now I took a job. It was as a manager of a team of 5 people where I was also going to program. So I've been managing, that was in 1999, managing teams in some form or another on and off over the last 20 years in software development and 30 years in other things, services and custom manufacturing. So I'm a manager too. I think managers are they're really stuck between a rock and a hard place. They're expected to do things that no human can do. And so, you know, yeah. So there you go. Does that help? How do you scale this up? It's pretty much the same. You just make sure you've got well-formed teams that have given the opportunity to be self-managing, self-organizing. You flow the work to them. They take care of it. There might be a huge board. I'm just going to give an example of all the work that we think is going to be going on here. And each team goes and decides what they're best suited for. That would be one way of doing it in an agile manner. But you also asked about remote. And I've got the last 2 years, tons of experience doing this remotely. The 5 or 6 years previous, also doing remote work. So, but not to the same degree. It's pretty straightforward. You have to have some tools and techniques. You can do, there's 4 or 5 easy techniques that you can use. The one that I see is a lot, somebody uses something like, is it AnyDesk, where you can all log into a central server and use that server as your development environment. Others divide the environments to each individual has their own environment. As you switch the people at the computer, you just have to check the code into your repository, check it out over here. You can automate that. It takes about 10 seconds. I've got a talk that I give based on that using this tool. It's called Mob. You can see it at mob.sh. I'll put that into the link here or into the chat. Mob.sh. That works really well. A lot of teams are using that. And you can just research it. A guy in Germany, I think, Simon Herrer developed that, and it's open source and it's works really, really well. Other questions? Or Marco, did I even come close to? I know I didn't satisfy you, but okay. Yeah, I don't see it being much different than working with individuals. It's just,
gotcha.
You know, we're now able to take advantage of more collaboration. Let's see. I see that we have, unfortunately, my screen is hiding. Yeah, you've got your hand up there, please. I got to see. Bogdan.
Yeah, thanks. First of all, it was a really good talk, especially the part about what are the issues that are blocking us.
Yes, yes.
It really seems that mob programming could solve it. Now,
yes.
I have this is an interesting example that you gave, the operating room, about the team flow.
Yes.
But we can also all remember pointless meetings where you just check out, you don't pay attention because the talk is irrelevant, etc., etc. So what is the difference? It seems to me that operating room example is just like a meeting where somebody can die. I mean, sorry I'm not trying to be funny, but really.
No, sure. No, and I agree with that. So it's not a meeting. They're actually doing the operation. They're not talking about what they're going to do in the operation. They're actually doing the operation. So a meeting is different than a work. So if in a meeting we are doing real work, I would call that meeting a workshop. Yeah. Right. So this is the difference. We are actually doing the work together rather than deciding about what work we will do together. Yeah. So a typical meeting is we share ideas, we come up with some ideas. We think that's the work. The work has to involve trying the ideas. We come up with those ideas, we assign the work to some people, we decide who should work on it. Your team will work on this stuff for a week. These individuals will do that. We'll get together in a week and see how it's going. That's a meeting, but that's not the doing of the work. So that's how I differentiate this. It's the same thing as if we're going to move our furniture and we get all of our friends over and we sit around for 3 hours talking about, well, what should we move and what should we put in the truck first and who should carry what? And no, we just go in, we say, hey, I need some help with the couch. 3 of us go over, we lift the couch together. We get to the door, we go, how are we going to get it through? We solve that problem as we go. So that's the difference between this and a meeting. So this isn't a meeting, except for that we are meeting each other together, but this is not a traditional meeting. you've probably been to meetings that were workshops. We need to figure out, how we're going to get through the next 3 months because our budget's getting cut. And so we're going to have to actually work through and make some real decisions about what stays, what goes, and so on. That's work. But if we go to a meeting where we're just sharing our ideas, helping each other think, that's just a meeting. Without the actual work.
Decisions, maybe making decisions, discussing stuff. Yeah.
Right. And so, to put that in a bigger scope, that kind of decision making, I think, is one of the big fundamental problems in modern business. That we think we can make decisions based on analyzing and talking, as opposed to also experimenting or trying. Yeah, I think that we think we got some work done, but you can prove this to yourself. If you do a meeting where 5 people are going to go off afterwards and go do some work, note when they come back how much they didn't understand. That understanding came from doing the work. So I've seen that. I used to keep records of these patterns for about 5 years, from 99 until 2005 or so. I kept a lot of notes to myself. I saw that over and over again. As soon as we get aligned in the meeting, as soon as we leave the meeting, we start becoming unaligned. And how bad it gets is how frequently are we going to communicate with each other? If we don't communicate frequently, we will go off. Matter of fact, I've seen people come back to meetings going, "Oh, I thought you were going to work on that." It's like, no, it was me. So now we start getting a note taker in the meetings to keep track of who's going to do what, on and on and on. It just becomes more dogmatic, more bureaucratic. Yeah, I don't think any of that works. What do I know? I'm just sharing my ideas. Did you have something else you wanted to share?
No, this is it. I have more questions, but I don't want to hog the time.
Well, let's see if anyone else has a question. How much more time do we have? I've got this set where I could go on until past, but I'm really open to whatever. So
maybe one of the questions could be, for an average developer, what do you think would be right approach to talk to your manager and try to convince him or her to accept this crazy idea?
Without getting fired, yes.
Exactly.
This is problematic. We need to learn to influence in our workplace and not give up on that. Mostly what happens in the workplace is we learn how to work within this environment that is not very good by protecting ourselves from the nonsense that's going on around us. And that nonsense is being created by other people who are just trying to protect themselves from the nonsense that's going on around them. So it's like a self-fulfilling vicious cycle that we see happening over and over again. I have been released from jobs, not exactly fired, but because I was the contrarian and saying, look, we got to try some things that will be better. So be cautious. But I also, the last 20 years of my career went from me saying things like, why are we doing this? It's not working. Let's try and find something better. To me, just quietly finding others who are ready to think about the same things, finding ways to say it. Like I started speaking at user groups, and I'm a terrible public speaker. I clam up. I very, very uncomfortable in front of people. I figured I got to learn how to do that. Where I would start sharing it at user groups, and that led to me making better connections of people who would hire me on the next job where they wanted to try these things. So I've got a list of maybe 15 or 20 little techniques. One of them is look for the other people in the organization who are also ready to think about these things. Keep alert, keep your mind open or your ears open, and find those people. Those who are willing to think about it, you can dig them up by doing things like saying, I would like to do a study group, like once a week we'll meet and talk about this or that. The people who are willing to come to a study group for an hour, those might be the ones that you want to be talking with. So there's little things like that I've tried. I actually got a boss once to pay me enough money to buy lunch for everybody when we were all working together. And so we would do a daily lunch and learn. Well, anybody who's willing to come to a daily lunch and learn on refactoring, that's a person who I want to probably be talking with. So I found ways to attract these different people that would help move this forward. as a manager, I would reach out to my peers. We always had, so when we would have work that was well planned out, there would always be gaps within that work when we couldn't get the answers we needed. So I would take on little things for other managers. I'm looking for the managers who are willing to try doing a little software project instead of a big one. And they're willing to do one that didn't get approved because I was offering them the time to do it. And they start learning how iterative development works. So I kind of just provided an environment where they could experiment with this without it costing us anything because we were there anyways. Another thing that worked well for me was always at my level, I would be in meetings where other managers would say, oh, we're having a problem with this or we're having a problem with that. And if I could, I would always say something effective. I've got a couple hours I can get from a couple of the team members who could help you. If you think they could help, would that be useful? So I'm always looking for an opportunity to help them. So after a few months or a year, they feel so guilty that when I ask for something, they want to help me back. So looking for ways to build an environment where at least they're grudgingly willing to try something. Like you are in control of deployments, maybe you can let us take on a little of that responsibility. Eventually, our team was doing all the deployments. Same thing with the database people. They're now working in the same department as the developers instead of being in a separate department. Same with testers. But this takes time. So you got to build those relationships. In some organizations, it can cost you your job. So just remember that warning. Learn to do this in a gentle way. I don't have the book. I don't know where to put it, but there's a great book from Linda Rising. Have you ever had her talk at your group? You should if you could. She's a very well-known expert in this world of software development. And she wrote a book called Fearless Change. And it just has lots of little techniques you can use to try and influence change in your organization. Gear, am I saying your name right?
Yes.
You had a question?
Yeah, you partially answered it. So I'll segue into a part of it to see if there's something you haven't covered already. So my question was going to be around something you said quite early on, that you didn't like to try to convince anybody to do something if they weren't really inclined to do it in the first place. And this is something I heard from you before, also heard from G. Hill. He has some ideas around what you would do instead. So I was thinking, if we don't want to try to convince people, then and I fully support that. What do we do instead? And you've covered a lot of it. First, working down the impediments, and then identifying the people who are actually interested or potentially open, right? Are there any other tips you could give?
So modeling the behavior that you want the organization to have. So early on, I did one thing that was just the stupidest thing ever. I was working with a group of my peers. We were all software developers back in somewhere around 2003 or 4. And I was really frustrated with them because they wouldn't do test-driven development. They wouldn't do pairing. Their code was just full of bugs. And it was a couple million lines of code that was a nightmare to work on. And one day we were sitting talking. I said, you know, if I was the boss, I wouldn't have hired any of you. Well, that's a really bad thing to say to somebody, but I was so frustrated. So that does not lead to improvement. That leads to even more resistance. Now, I worked with that same group of people for another 3 or 4 years after that. And I was put in charge of a certain aspect of all this. So now I was in some ways, not their boss, but someone they needed to answer to. So, you know, I went about building the wrong relationships with these people. What I learned in that little gap, though, was just do the things that you think we should as an organization be doing. And one of them was test-driven development. And the way that paid off for me was my boss wouldn't allow us to do test-driven development. Oh, sorry, pardon me. I have to shut something off here. My boss wouldn't allow us to do test-driven development because he said, well, if you do test-driven development, you have to write twice as much code and we don't have time to do that. Well, that's just as lame of an excuse as I could ever hear. But now I just went ahead and did test-driven development. I just didn't ever check that code in. This is how that modeling that behavior worked. Whenever somebody would sit with me to work on something, they could see I was doing the testing. They could question it, but they couldn't tell me not to. They were just working with me. I was helping them with something. Over time, my code was the only code that wasn't getting kicked back from the testing department. That testing department we weren't allowed to talk to the people in the testing department. So because they didn't really know what was going to get tested, the other developers had code that had bugs in it. Because I wrote my own tests, I could prove that everything I was writing was working. I literally, they call it the test cycle or the test and fix cycle. While we're in that cycle, they're watching for the bug count or as it jumps up and down. My code wasn't getting bugs. And now they could see, having observed that I was doing test-driven development and a little bit of proof. So I just modeled the behavior. I never told them, you need to do this. So I was learning, I was a stupid manager or a stupid younger programmer. I was learning how to influence the change. So modeling the behavior is probably the first really powerful thing I learned. And learning to speak at user groups was another powerful thing because it helped attract other like-minded people to me. Let's see, it says, can I share the slide of psychological definition of flow for 10 seconds again? I can do that. I need to share my screen. And let's see if we can find where that was. You just need to guide me back to where that, whoops, I went way too far. I need to start that again. Pardon me. I clicked the wrong direction. It'll only take me a second, so please forgive me. We're at the end of the talk. There it is. Okay, guide me to, it'll take me a second, I have to resize something on my screen. There's so many things you got to click on nowadays, right? So I'll get back up here. I'm just going to go back till we get there. It was near the end of the talk. I've gone back too far. It was in here. This one? Or this one? Vladimir, is this the one you wanted? Okay. I think that's a direct quote from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. You probably would know better than me how to say his name, right? And it's sort of in your neighborhood. I've been saying, oops, flow. I'm going the wrong way again. Mihai? Csikszentmihalyi? Is that close?
Yes.
I actually heard him say it in a recording somewhere once, and I still couldn't say it. So yeah, that's kind of tough. All right, so any other questions? Oh, Leon, you have your hand up.
Hey, I just want to start by saying that I've been using the mob programming and similar techniques like pair programming for a few years. Excellent. And I wanted to ask something from personal experience that came up more than once. It's how do you handle more than 3 people? So let's say 5 people and all that context switching. And how do you handle...
wait. Mm-hmm. How do you mean context switching?
Well, the way we implemented it, so we have a, let's say, driver, and there are people switching by doing the work. So we're switching the driver, but the driver isn't doing the work. The navigators are doing the work. Yes.
So
okay.
the person at the keyboard is just a transcriber, and we can switch them out very frequently. We found 4 minutes to 7 minutes worked very well, but there's no context switching going on. You just sit down at the keyboard and you type whatever they're asking you to type. You know, they're not giving you, so the instructions aren't like type the word public, then the word void, and then the words, you know, it's like make a new method that gets a customer. And if you know how to get a customer by calling a service, you just do that whole thing. But that's a few lines of code. So that there's very little. So is that what you mean by context switching?
That and also something else. I mean, there are some tools. For example, in IntelliJ, you can use Code with Me, and you can actually have a feeling that everyone is working on the same computer. That's not actually the problem. The problem is that I actually had is that when more than 3 people are involved, in my experience, it's very hard for all of them to follow the meeting and everything that's done. and it's hard for them actually to be involved in everything. It's hard to follow the thing that the more people there are, it's harder to follow everything. How would I say?
Now that may be true. So I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but we found that with 5 or 6 people, it always works rather well. Now, in the days of us working co-located. So for example, if you're the tester, you don't care too much about the specific code somebody's writing to implement a drop-down box. So that's not going to be very interesting, but you're thinking about how am I going to prove that drop-down box is working correctly? So you're thinking about something that's with the team, but not the specific thing they're doing right now. If we find we're not able to provide enough attention, then we probably want to talk about it. Why is that happening? We found that almost anything we worked on took an hour or 2, and then we deployed it. So we're working in rather small chunks that it need to be fully tested, need to be fully ready to go, that it's got to be exactly what the product owner wanted. So that means it needs close contribution from those people. Now, if we have 5 front-end developers, we maybe are, and that can be useful, but maybe we're doing, we have too much of a single skill. Remember on that team, when we started talking about team programming, we want to have that variety of skills. So this thing here, high skill integration, that means we need to have the different skills. So if let's say I'm a front-end person and I'm saying, yeah, we need to indicate which of these boxes are required and which ones aren't required. Well, the database person should be thinking, where are we going to store that information? Is that going to be in the code itself? Will it be in a config file? Will it be in the database? Likely that belongs in a database or a data store of some sort. So we're thinking about how does our specialty interact with what we're doing right now. If we find we're working on something that takes hours and hours, maybe some small detailed thing about the way AWS works or something, we might not need everybody there for the full time. And so some of us, we might break apart and a pair will go work on this thing, another pair will work on that, and this pair will stay in on that. But we found that very infrequently. Is that helping you with this?
Yeah, that actually helps a lot. I realized, from the personal experience, that it's very easy to fall into the rabbit hole and try to solve everything with more programming. And it's usually useful for the things that you just mentioned, like there should be multiple team members, maybe not everyone with the same role, and complex problem which actually they can accomplish together. It's not so good for the less complex problems, as I experienced.
Well, so now I would argue that we start off thinking that the complex problems are where this really brought value, but we then start finding that even the easiest stuff so sometimes what would often happen is a team member would say, oh, this is easy, I'll go do it alone. And then they come back and we'd go on, we'd be working on the other thing, the rest of the team. Then we start realizing that at least as a team, we should look at something before you take it and go off alone. And we started finding a lot of those easy things we could automate. So we elevated the problem from being, so first of all, why are we ever paying programmers to work on the easy stuff? We should just get rid of all that easy stuff and no longer do it anymore. That's, we haven't seen we haven't figured out the abstraction yet that would allow us to not have to have those. There's 2 types of work in here, the easy stuff and the grunt work. The stuff that you just have to slog through. It takes you a long time to go through a bunch of boring details. We should never pay developers to do that work. We should pay them to not have to do that work anymore. So they need to figure out how do we make it where we never need to do that kind of work. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not telling you how to work. I want to make sure this. Mob programming does not replace solo work or pair programming. It gives us another option of a way to work. And if we become really good at collaborating, we will work more gently throughout the day, more relaxed, less fatiguing. And at the end of the day, when you get home with your family, you don't want to just get a jug of booze and go to bed. You still have energy at the end of the day. And that's what I found worked for us. So there's a lot to figure out here. It's not replacing the ways we worked, it adds to it, but let's get good at collaborating. If we're finding we're getting fatigued, or that this becomes boring, we need to figure out why are we allowing that to happen and how can we improve on this? That's what I would invite everybody to do. Now, I know I've used up all your time and you still have some things you want to finish up on. So I'll leave you be. Thank you so much for bringing me here.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure. Philip?
Yeah, nothing more. Just thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you much.
Thanks. This was really great.
Okay, we are giving away free 2 tickets for the workshop on RavenDB Basics. Details are in the chat, so send us email and we'll send you an invitation. Okay, thank you, everyone.
See you
Bye.
next time.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.